Welcome to the world of sci-fi stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. The moment humans say, "I'll handle it," the war is already over. The war had already been raging for over a decade. The Dominion, an empire spanning thousands of star systems, had crushed every species that stood in their way. Their fleets were vast, their technology unmatched, and their warriors relentless. They had conquered entire civilizations without breaking a sweat, their dominance unquestioned. And then they met humans. To the Dominion, humanity was just another insignificant species, another primitive civilization to be assimilated or eradicated. They attacked Earth with the same cold efficiency that had worked countless times before. Their fleets darkened the skies, their plasma weapons burned entire cities to the ground, and their war machines slaughtered millions. But humans did not break. Instead, something terrifying happened. Instead of surrendering, humans did what no other species had dared to do. They fought back with everything they had. Not just weapons, but with something far more dangerous: their will, their ingenuity, their sheer unrelenting refusal to accept defeat. It started with small things: guerrilla warfare in the ruins of once great cities, soldiers who refused to die even when their bodies should have given up, pilots who took on entire squadrons alone and won, engineers who turned scraps of metal into weapons that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. The Dominion expected humanity to collapse in months. It had been years now, and instead of dwindling, humanity was becoming stronger. They weren't just resisting, they were adapting, learning, and countering every strategy thrown at them. Aboard the Dominion's command vessel, High Warlord Vex craned his neck toward the massive Galactic display, his tendrils twitching in irritation. The latest reports were troubling. Another Dominion supply line had been severed, another warship ambushed and destroyed by what should have been an inferior enemy. He couldn't comprehend it. The humans should have been on their knees by now, begging for mercy. Instead, they were laughing. He had seen the intercepted transmissions. The humans had a phrase, one they repeated in every battle report, every desperate mission, every impossible situation: "I'll handle it." It made no sense. The words were simple, but the tone they were delivered with, cold, confident, almost casual, was unnerving. It didn't matter if a human soldier was outnumbered 100 to 1, if a colony was on the verge of destruction, if a fleet was facing annihilation. Somewhere a human would shrug and say those words: "I'll handle it." And somehow they always did. Vex's mandibles clacked together in frustration as he turned to his second in command. "What does it mean?" The officer shifted uneasily, his spines pressing flat against his carapace. "It is difficult to explain, High Warlord." Vex growled, "Try." The officer hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Humans have this belief, a confidence that borders on insanity. When they say those words, it means they are about to do something reckless, impossible, and somehow they succeed." Vex exhaled sharply. Superstition, arrogance, it will not save them. But deep down, he wasn't so sure, because right now, a single human was about to prove him wrong again. On a barren, war-torn moon orbiting the Dominion's key supply world, Captain Dorian recrouched behind a wrecked tank, his rifle held steady as he surveyed the battlefield. The Dominion's forces were swarming the outpost, thousands of them, their insectoid bodies glistening under the red light of the twin suns. His platoon was outnumbered 10 to 1, their defenses crumbling. His lieutenant glanced at him, eyes filled with uncertainty. "Sir, we need to fall back. There's no way we're holding this position." Dorian exhaled slowly, adjusting his rifle. "Yeah, I know." "Sir." Dorian smirked. "I'll handle it." And that was it. No elaborate plan, no backup, no reinforcements, just those words. He tapped his comms. "Command, this is Re. I need an orbital strike at my position." A brief pause, then the voice of his commander, General Foster, came through. "In the middle of it, Captain, you won't survive." Dorian's grin widened. "I know, send it anyway." Silence, then a chuckle. "All right, Re, you crazy bastard." Above the moon, high in orbit, a human warship adjusted its trajectory. Cannons hummed to life. The Dominion ground forces below detected the energy buildup a second too late. And then the sky came down in fire. The Dominion forces barely had time to scream before the entire battlefield was engulfed in a blinding explosion. The shock wave tore through everything, sending debris flying, bodies disintegrating. At the very center of the blast zone, as dust and smoke settled, a single figure stood, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Dorian wiped the blood from his forehead, cracked his neck, and picked up his rifle. The outpost was saved. He tapped his comms again. Told you I'd handle it. And somewhere on a Dominion command ship, a high warlord felt something he had never felt before: fear. The Dominion had never known fear. They were the conquerors, the ones who crushed resistance before it could even begin. They had reduced civilizations to dust, shattered empires, and rewritten history in their name. But now, for the first time, fear crept into the edges of their war councils. Reports from the battlefield had become erratic, chaotic, filled with stories that shouldn't have been possible. A single human soldier taking down an entire strike team. A fleet of outdated ships outmaneuvering state-of-the-art Dominion warcraft. An entire outpost held against impossible odds because one human decided it wasn't time to lose yet. And always, before the tide turned, the humans would say it: "I'll handle it." High Warlord Vex was done underestimating them. He stood at the command deck of his warship, his eyes fixed on the glowing battlefield reports. The humans were like a virus, spreading their defiance wherever they went. He had to end this war before their madness infected the rest of the galaxy. "Deploy the Titan fleet," he ordered, his voice sharp. His second-in-command stiffened. "High Warlord, the Titan fleet has not been fully prepared." "Enough," Vex snapped, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "They have survived because we have not given them the full force of the Dominion. No more skirmishes, no more underestimating. We will erase humanity from existence." The Titan fleet was the Dominion's ultimate weapon. Massive warships, each the size of a moon, armed with planet-cracking cannons and near-impenetrable defenses. They had only been deployed once before, against a species that no longer existed. The humans would burn. Dorian sat in the cockpit of his stolen Dominion fighter, adjusting the controls with one hand and checking his wounds with the other. His ribs ached, his arm was barely functional, and his uniform was torn and covered in dried blood. But he was alive, and in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. He had stolen the fighter in the chaos of the orbital strike, using the confusion to slip past enemy forces. Now he was heading straight toward the Dominion supply fleet. If he could hit it, humanity would have a chance to push forward. His comms crackled to life. "Do you copy?" Dorian smirked at the familiar voice. "Loud and clear, General." "You are one stubborn son of a," General Foster said, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and relief. "I assume you've got another crazy plan." Dorian checked his scanner. The Dominion supply fleet was 2 jumps away. He had one fighter, half a tank of fuel, and an old Dominion officer uniform stuffed in the cockpit. "Yeah," he said, "I'll handle it." A long pause, then a sigh. "Why do I even ask?" Dorian grinned, "Because it always works." The Dominion supply fleet was massive, a convoy of heavily guarded transport ships carrying weapons, fuel, and reinforcements to the front lines. Dorian slipped into formation, his stolen fighter blending seamlessly with the others. The Dominion's reliance on protocol and rigid structure was their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. They didn't expect creativity, they didn't expect improvisation, and they sure as hell didn't expect someone like Dorian He accessed the fighter's command console, bypassing the security locks with stolen access codes. A few keystrokes, and he was in the supply fleet's security grid. It flickered. The automatic threat detection system shut down. The Dominion warships watching over the convoy went blind for exactly 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds, Dorian did the unthinkable. He transmitted false orders directly to the Dominion captains. "Priority override. All transports are to reroute to Sector 14 Beta for emergency resupply. Immediate compliance required." A moment of hesitation, then one by one, the massive transport ships began veering off course. Dorian exhaled slowly. The Dominion's reliance on hierarchy was laughable. They followed orders blindly, never questioning, never adapting. And now their entire supply fleet was headed straight into an ambush. High Warlord Vex watched the reports with growing rage. "What is happening?" he snarled. The officer stammered. "Our supply fleet has changed course. Orders were issued from," he hesitated, his tendrils twitching nervously, "from your command, High Warlord." Vex's eyes burned with fury. "I issued no such orders." Then realization dawned. The humans, they had infiltrated his fleet. They had turned his own ships against him, and somewhere out there he knew a single human was grinning as he whispered those cursed words. "I'll handle it." The Dominion supply fleet was flying straight into a nightmare. As the massive transport ships unknowingly rerouted to Sector 14 Beta, humanity was already waiting for them. Cloaked warships hovered in the asteroid belt, their engines running cold, weapons primed. Fighters lined up in perfect formation, hidden in the debris fields, engines off to avoid detection. They had one chance, one moment to strike before the Dominion realized the mistake. General Foster sat aboard the UNS Retribution, watching the supply fleet inch closer. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, finally, the Dominion ships crossed the threshold. Foster took a breath. "All units," he said, "light them up." Space ignited. A storm of missile and rail-gun fire and high-energy blasts tore through the Dominion's unshielded transports. The first ship exploded instantly, breaking apart in a fireball that sent debris flying. The second took direct hits to its fuel reserves, detonating like a miniature sun. In an instant, the ambush was absolute. Dorian re-watched from his stolen Dominion fighter, a smirk forming on his lips. "Beautiful," he muttered, gripping the controls. He gunned the engine, breaking formation and diving toward one of the remaining transports. The Dominion finally realized the trap. Fighters scrambled from the remaining ships, trying to form a defensive perimeter, but it was already too late. Dorian wove through the chaos, his stolen ship giving him the perfect disguise. He opened fire, blasting apart a Dominion escort before it could get its shields online. His comms crackled as another pilot, Lieutenant Vasquez, hailed him. I swear, if you don't die today, I'm buying you a drink." Dorian chuckled. "I like whiskey, expensive whiskey." "I hate you." "I know." With a sharp turn, Dorian locked onto the largest transport in the fleet, one of the Dominion's primary ammunition haulers. If they could take it out, the enemy front lines would be crippled. But the Dominion wasn't going down without a fight. A massive warship, nearly 3 km long, emerged from the shadow of a nearby moon, its hull bristling with weapons. It was a Titan-class dreadnought, one of the Dominion's deadliest war machines. Dorian's smirk faded. "Well, that complicates things." On the Dominion flagship, High Warlord Vex's mandibles twisted in fury. "Deploy all forces," he growled. "Destroy the humans, burn their fleet to ashes." His officers scrambled to obey, but inside, Vex felt something gnawing at him. This wasn't how battles were supposed to go. The Dominion struck first, crushed their enemies, and moved on. But now they were reacting, being outplayed, and the worst part, one human had done this. One. It was impossible. It was madness. It was terrifying. But it was real, and he had the sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Dorian stared at the incoming Titan-class warship, his fingers tightening on the controls. The Dominion didn't play fair. Good, neither did he. He opened his comms to the fleet. "All right, listen up. We need to take down that dreadnought or we're all screwed. Any bright ideas?" Silence, then Vasquez sighed. "You're going to do something stupid, aren't you?" Dorian grinned. "Always." He flipped the fighter into a tight spin, accelerating straight toward the dreadnought. Alarms blared inside the cockpit as targeting systems locked onto him. Plasma turrets swiveled, preparing to blast him out of existence. But Dorian had no intention of dying today. He punched the afterburners, weaving through the incoming fire, dodging explosions by inches. The dreadnought's shields flared as he skimmed the surface, flying so close he could see the seams in the metal plating. Then he saw it, a docking bay still open, still receiving transports. Perfect. "Vasquez," he said, grinning like a madman, "tell my mom I love her." He cut the comms and dove straight into the docking bay. The docking bay loomed ahead, a gaping maw in the side of the dreadnought. Dozens of Dominion fighters were landing and taking off in perfect regimented order until Dorian ruined everything. His stolen fighter rocketed into the bay at full speed, dodging incoming ships by inches. Sirens blared as Dominion pilots scrambled out of the way, their systems struggling to register an unauthorized entry. Dorian grinned. Showtime. At the last second, he ejected. His seat blasted upward, flipping him through the artificial gravity barrier at the docking bay's entrance. His fighter, however, kept going, straight into a row of parked Dominion ships. The resulting explosion was magnificent. Fire and debris ripped through the bay, engulfing anything that wasn't bolted down. Fighters toppled like dominoes, their fuel reserves igniting. The hangar turned into a battlefield in an instant. Dorian landed hard, rolling across the deck before coming to a stop. His head throbbed, his ribs protested, but he was alive. That was good enough. "All right," he muttered, groaning as he pushed himself up. "Step 1, infiltrate the ship. Step 2, don't die." A squad of Dominion soldiers spotted him, their weapons snapping up, their insected bodies moving in perfect coordination. Dorian gave them a lazy salute. "Hey there." They opened fire. He ducked behind a stack of crates, bullets and plasma bolts slamming into the metal. Reaching to his belt, he grabbed a Dominion shock grenade, one of the many souvenirs he had picked up over the years. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it over the crates. The soldiers barely had time to react before the grenade detonated, sending an electrical surge through their armor. They collapsed, twitching violently. Dorian smirked. "Step 2, check." He snatched a rifle from one of the unconscious soldiers and bolted toward the nearest corridor. He had no idea where he was going, but that was never a problem before. All he needed to do was cause as much chaos as possible. High Warlord Vex was furious. His dreadnought, the pride of the Dominion fleet, was under attack from the inside. He stormed onto the bridge, officers scrambling at their stations. "Reports," he demanded. An aide stammered. "High Warlord, we have an intruder." "I know that already," Vex snapped, his claws digging into the armrest of his throne. "One human should not be able to infiltrate a Titan-class warship." The officer hesitated. "With respect, High Warlord, this is not just any human." Vex's mandibles clicked together in frustration. The name had been circulating in war reports for months. A soldier, a saboteur, a nightmare in human form, and he was here on his ship. Vex's claws tightened. "Seal every bulkhead, deploy security drones, flood the lower decks with nerve gas. I want that human dead." The officer nodded and relayed the orders, but they had a sinking feeling that none of it would work. Because if there was one thing he had learned about humans, it was this. When they said, "I'll handle it," the war was already over. Dorian sprinted down the corridors as sirens blared around him. Doors slammed shut ahead, bulkheads sealing in an attempt to trap him. Too bad for them. He skidded to a stop and grabbed another grenade from his belt, this one a shaped charge. Slapping it onto the door, he took a few steps back and pressed the detonator. The explosion rocked the hallway and the door crumbled inward. Dorian stepped through the smoke. Another Dominion squad awaited him, weapons ready. He didn't hesitate. Raising his stolen rifle, he opened fire, cutting them down before they could react. He grabbed a Dominion officer by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "Where's the reactor core?" The officer hissed in defiance. Dorian sighed and pulled out another grenade. "Listen, I don't have time for this. You tell me you live, you don't." "Well," he let the grenade roll in his palm. The officer's eyes widened. "Sector 7G down 2 levels. See, that wasn't so hard." Dorian let him go, then knocked him unconscious with the butt of his rifle. He checked his ammo. Low, not great. Didn't matter now, he had a target. He was going to blow this ship straight to hell. Dorian moved fast. The Dominion warship was an iron fortress, but he had fought inside these things before. The halls were sleek, metallic, and eerily clean, too clean for a vessel made for war. The Dominion liked order, precision. That was their weakness, because war wasn't clean. War was chaos. And Dorian, he was chaos. The siren screamed overhead as he sprinted down the corridor, his boots pounding against the floor. Somewhere above him, Dominion officers were barking orders, trying to lock him down, but they were too slow, too rigid. He had already memorized the layout from a stolen data slate weeks ago. Sector 7G, 2 levels down. Reactor core, the heart of the ship. Take it out and the whole war machine crumbles. He ducked into a side passage as a squad of Dominion soldiers rounded the corner, their rifles at the ready. He heard them barking in their chittering language, scanning the area. They moved like machines, like programmed drones following protocol. Dorian smirked. He had no use for protocol. He pulled a smoke grenade from his belt, twisted the cap, and rolled it into the hallway. The moment it hissed to life, filling the air with thick gray fog, he moved, bursting from cover. He fired 3 quick shots, taking down 2 soldiers before they could react. The third turned toward him, but Dorian was already on him, slamming his rifle butt into the Dominion's face. The alien crumpled. Dorian stepped over the bodies and kept moving. High Warlord Vex watched the carnage unfold from the security monitors. He had expected a tactical strike, a precision attack from an organized human unit. Instead, he was watching a single human tear through his warship like a virus. Vex's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. How is he still alive? An officer hesitated. We flooded the lower decks with nerve gas, but... But what? Vex snarled. The officer gulped. The human set fire to it. Vex's mandibles twitched. He what? The officer replayed the footage, grainy, chaotic. The human had ruptured a fuel line and ignited it, burning away the toxic gas before it could kill him. It was reckless. It was absurd. It had worked. Vex exhaled slowly, fury bubbling inside him. This is not a soldier, he muttered. This is something else, a predator, a monster, human. Dorian reached the reactor core. The door was massive, thick enough to withstand a direct missile strike. Dominion engineers weren't stupid. They knew this was their most vital system. But Dorian had learned one thing about Dominion tech. It was too perfect, and perfect things had cracks. He knelt beside the door's control panel, prying it open with his knife. Inside, glowing blue circuitry pulsed in delicate patterns. Dominion technology was miles ahead of human tech, but it was also predictable. Dorian yanked out a handful of wires. The door shuddered. He yanked out another. The metal hissed as emergency mechanisms engaged, trying to stay online. Sparks rained from the panel. Then, with a heavy groan, the door unlocked. Dorian grinned. They always over-engineer things. He stepped inside. The reactor chamber was vast, filled with glowing energy conduits and thick coolant pipes. The Dominion relied on plasma cores, stable, powerful, but dangerously volatile when tampered with. Dorian had no intention of tampering. He was here to destroy. He pulled 3 explosive charges from his belt, setting them against the main reactor housing. The Dominion built their cores with redundancy, but nothing survived 3 synchronized blasts at point-blank range. As he armed the detonators, his comms crackled. Vasquez's voice came through tense. You might want to hurry. The Dominion just scrambled their entire fleet. They know you're there. Dorian smirked. Took them long enough. Evac in 2 minutes. You make it or you don't. Dorian took one last look at the explosives. All set. He pressed the detonator, locking in a 3-minute countdown. Then he ran. Vex's mandibles twitched as alarms blared through the ship, warning lights flashing red throughout the bridge. The automated Dominion voice droned. Reactor overload in 2 minutes, 50 seconds. Vex rose from his throne. Get me a status update now. A trembling officer checked the readings. The human, he set charges on the reactor. Vex's vision darkened with rage. He had spent his life conquering civilizations, commanding fleets, shaping history itself. And now he was being humiliated by one man. Unacceptable. The warship shuddered as the self-destruct countdown continued. 2 minutes left. Vex clenched his fists. Kill him. Dorian was running out of time. His stolen rifle was empty, his body ached, his lungs burned, and Dominion soldiers were everywhere. He sprinted through the halls, dodging gunfire as bullets and plasma bolts tore through the walls behind him. He dove into a side corridor, barely avoiding an explosion. His comms crackled again. 1 minute left, Where the hell are you? Dorian gritted his teeth. He needed a way out, now. Then he saw it, a docking bay, a fighter still running. Dorian yanked a Dominion officer's pistol from a fallen soldier and fired at the fuel lines above the bay. Flames erupted, causing chaos as Dominion engineers scrambled for safety. Dorian seized the moment, sprinting toward the nearest fighter, a sleek black Dominion interceptor. He vaulted into the cockpit. The controls were alien, unreadable, but he didn't need to understand them. He just needed one button. His fingers found the ignition switch. The engine roared to life. Dominion guards rushed forward, weapons raised. Too late. Dorian slammed the thrusters. The fighter launched out of the bay into open space. Behind him, the dreadnought trembled. The reactor hit critical mass, and then a firestorm erupted. The warship detonated, a blinding explosion consuming everything. The shock wave rocked Dorian's fighter as he gripped the controls, teeth bared. He barely managed to stabilize. His comms crackled. Vasquez's voice, did you make it?" Dorian exhaled, grinning. "Yeah." He glanced at the inferno behind him. "I handled that." The Dominion's greatest warship was gone. What had once been a symbol of their unstoppable conquest was now nothing but scattered debris drifting through space. Flames still licked the shattered remains, and emergency distress beacons flickered weakly, their signals lost in the silence of the void. Dorian readjusted the controls of his stolen fighter, angling towards the rendezvous point where the human fleet was waiting. His body ached from the relentless sprint through the Dominion's war machine, his mind still running on pure adrenaline, but he had done it. One man, one mission, and a Titan-class dreadnought was nothing but space dust. His comms crackled again, and Vasquez's voice came through. "All right, I'm officially out of words. You're either the luckiest bastard alive or just too damn stubborn to die." Dorian smirked, tilting his fighter slightly so he could get a better look at the wreckage behind him. "Maybe both." "Fleet's on standby," Vasquez continued. "The moment that dreadnought went up, the Dominion fleet started pulling back. I think we just bought ourselves a hell of an advantage." Dorian knew what that meant, fear. The Dominion had never feared anything before. They had marched across the stars, conquering species with cold, calculated precision. But now they had seen something they didn't understand. A human, alone, and he had torn them apart. High Warlord Vex stood in the shattered remains of his throne room. The bridge of his warship had been on the highest deck, overlooking the stars like a god surveying his domain. Now nothing remained but a twisted, blackened shell drifting in space. The emergency escape pod had barely saved his life. The fleet was in chaos. The humans had crippled their supply lines, destroyed their most powerful warship, and turned the tide of battle in a way no species ever had. And the worst part, it had not been an army, not a fleet, not a strategic council of masterminds. It had been one. One single human had done all of this. Vex's claws scraped against the metal console as he replayed the security footage one more time. The human running through the corridors. The human tearing through Dominion warriors like they were nothing. The human setting charges on the reactor core without hesitation. And then, the last transmission before his warship exploded. "I handled it." Vex shut off the display, his breath coming in ragged bursts, his mind a whirl of emotion he had never felt before. He had underestimated them. That was his mistake. That was the Dominion's mistake. He could feel it now, a shift in the war, in the way the galaxy would speak of humans from this day forward. The Dominion had fought them as weak, simple, a species to be crushed like all the rest. But they weren't weak. They were something else. They were creatures that thrived in chaos, who fought hardest when they had nothing left. They were reckless, unpredictable, and terrifyingly determined. And when they said, "I'll handle it," the war was already over. Vex exhaled and turned to his remaining officers. "Send a message to the High Command," he ordered, his voice steady, but deep beneath the surface something had cracked. "Tell them we may have made a mistake." Back at the human fleet, Dorian retouched down on the main carrier, the UNS Retribution. The hangar was already buzzing with activity, engineers scrambling to repair damaged fighters, medics rushing to assist the wounded. The air was thick with sweat, blood, and the undeniable energy of victory. As soon as he climbed out of the stolen fighter, a squad of soldiers rushed toward him, cheering and clapping him on the back. He grinned, wincing at the soreness in his ribs. General Foster stood at the edge of the hangar, arms crossed, watching him with a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. Dorian walked up, giving a lazy salute. "Mission accomplished, sir." Foster sighed. "You're a goddamn nightmare, Dorian smirked. "I try." Foster shook his head, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You realize what you just did, do you?" Dorian glanced around. The entire fleet had been preparing for a long, grueling war against an enemy they had never thought they could match. And now the Dominion was retreating. Now humanity had a chance. Dorian shrugged. "I handled it." The human fleet was alive with energy. Victory. It wasn't a word they had used often in this war. They had been surviving, resisting, clawing out scraps of hope where they could. But now they had done something impossible. A single human had walked onto the Dominion's deadliest warship and turned it into a graveyard, and the enemy knew it. Dorian sat in the debriefing room aboard the UNS Retribution, his bruised body aching from every movement. His uniform was still ripped, stained with dried blood, but he hadn't changed. He was too busy enjoying the moment. Across from him, General Foster paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. The older man was calm, always thinking ahead, but even he couldn't hide the smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You really did it," Foster said finally, shaking his head. Dorian leaned back, propping his boots up on the table. "Yeah, not bad." Foster scoffed. "You took down a Titan-class dreadnought, crippled their supply lines, and made the Dominion panic. I'd say that's a little more than not bad." Dorian grinned, despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "Hey, I told you I'd handle it." Foster sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're impossible." Then, after a beat, he added, "But we needed this." That was an understatement. The Dominion had been winning for years. Every battle had been a desperate struggle just to hold the line. But now, for the first time, humanity wasn't just fighting back, they were winning. Across the stars, in the Dominion's Central War Council, the High Command was in turmoil. The chamber was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Vex stood before the gathered warlords, his armor still dented from the destruction of his warship. His voice was steady, but deep beneath the surface there was something new: doubt. "They are not what we believed them to be," he said. The warlords hissed in displeasure. "They are primitives," one of them snapped. "A mistake of evolution. They should have been eradicated months ago." Vex's mandibles clicked together, and yet one of them destroyed a Titan-class warship, alone. The chamber fell silent. They had all seen the reports, the footage, the way the human Dorian Ree had torn through their forces with reckless defiance. One soldier, one man, and he had done more damage in a single mission than entire fleets had in years. "He was an anomaly," another warlord growled, slamming his clawed hand onto the table. "A statistical outlier." Vex stared at him. Was he? He turned to the display at the center of the room, showing the latest intelligence reports. The human fleet wasn't just surviving anymore, they were pushing forward. Dominion outposts were falling, supply lines were failing, and every time they tried to counterattack, the same words kept appearing in intercepted transmissions, a phrase the humans repeated with unshakable certainty: "I'll handle it." Vex exhaled slowly. "It is not just one soldier, it is all of them. Their minds do not function like ours. We calculate risk, we weigh consequences. They do not." He gestured to the reports. "They win battles they should lose, they survive what should kill them, and now they believe they can defeat us." Silence, then one of the warlords, older and more cautious than the others, spoke. "And if they are right?" No one answered. For the first time in Dominion history, they did not know. Dorian stood at the observation deck of the Retribution, staring out at the stars. The wreckage of the Dominion fleet was still drifting out there, a silent monument to what had just happened. Vasquez walked up beside him, arms crossed. "So what now?" Dorian took a deep breath. "Now," he let out a slow exhale, eyes locked on the distant stars. "Now we stop surviving." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "And start what?" Dorian's lips curled into a smirk. "Winning." Because for the first time since the war had started, humanity had something more powerful than weapons or technology. They had momentum, and they weren't stopping. The war had changed. For years, humanity had been fighting with their backs against the wall, always retreating, always barely surviving. The Dominion had been a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable. But now the impossible had happened. Now humanity was winning. Dorian Ree walked through the war room aboard the UNS Retribution, surrounded by high-ranking officers, strategists, and battlefield commanders. The hologram map in the center of the room showed a growing blue wave of human territory, and the red, Dominion territory was shrinking. General Foster stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "We've analyzed the latest intel. The Dominion is pulling back, not a full retreat, but they've slowed their offensives." He tapped the hologram map, zooming in on key systems. "They're refortifying their inner colonies. They know they lost momentum." A murmur ran through the room. This was unprecedented. The Dominion had never slowed down for anyone. Foster turned to Dorian. "You started this, Ree, so tell me what's our next move."